Walk through a modern store, and it can seem like every bad smell in life now comes with its own product. There are plug-ins for the hallway, sprays for the sofa, beads for the laundry, candles for the kitchen, and little machines that promise to make a room smell like pine, vanilla, ocean air, or fresh linen. And still, a lot of homes never quite smell fresh. They smell covered. Under the perfume, there is still old food, damp fabric, stale air, and that heavy, closed-up feeling that settles into a room when odors are managed too late instead of stopped early. A woman in a 1950s kitchen did not have a wall full of scent options. In many homes, she had one plain box sitting in a cabinet near the sink or tucked beside the refrigerator shelves. It cost very little. It was not pretty. It was not sold as luxury. But that cheap mineral, baking soda, quietly helped keep kitchens and fabrics, trash pails and refrigerators from turning into smell traps in the first place. If old household wisdom like this still means something to you, subscribe and stay with us. There is a lot worth remembering in these small routines that once kept an ordinary home feeling cared for. What made that little box so useful was not that it filled the air with a better smell. It did something more practical. It helped absorb and neutralize odors before they could spread through the house. That difference between fragrance and real freshness matters. Modern freshness is often sold as fragrance. In many 1950s homes, freshness meant the air itself felt cleaner, because the bad smell had been dealt with at its source. That mattered even more because homes worked differently then. Many houses were smaller than they are today. Kitchens were tighter, and every inch of space was vital. Even the refrigerators were much smaller back then. Families often cooked more often, stored less excess, and used the same rooms hard every day. A smell from yesterday's onions, fish, damp dishcloths, or a full trash pail did not stay hidden in some far corner. It moved fast. In a small home, one neglected odor could change the feeling of the whole place. So women learned to treat freshness as part of the daily rhythm of the house, not as a final touch added after the problem had already settled in. That is one of the biggest differences between then and now. Today, many people clean when the mess becomes visible, or spray when the odor becomes obvious. In the 1950s, a good number of housewives were trained to notice the earlier signs. The refrigerator has picked up a sharp, mixed smell. The sink drain is turning a little unpleasant. The garbage pail is still bearable, but not for long. The home stayed fresher because attention arrived earlier. Baking soda fit perfectly into that kind of life because it was cheap, simple, and useful in more than one room. A family did not need to buy one thing for the refrigerator, another for the rug, another for the laundry, and something else for the bathroom. One basic household staple could handle a surprising number of small odor problems. It sat there quietly like an extra pair of hands, ready whenever the house started drifting in the wrong direction. There was also something deeply practical about the women who relied on it. They were not trying to create a fake scent that impressed people the second they walked through the door. They were trying to prevent embarrassment, save effort, and keep the house from feeling stale. A fresh home was connected to pride, but it was also connected to comfort. Children came in from outside, husbands brought work smells through the door, meals were cooked from scratch, laundry waited in baskets, towels stayed damp, ashtrays were common in many households, so were diaper pails. The idea that a home should stay pleasant without constant spending was not a trend. It was part of managing the house well, and that is where the little box becomes more interesting than it first sounds. It was not really about one product, it was about a whole way of thinking. A 1950s homemaker often understood that odors build in layers. Food smells settle into the refrigerator, grease hangs near the stove, dampness lingers in cloth, settling deep into the fibers. Closed windows trap all of it. So if she wanted the house to smell fresh, she did not begin with perfume. She began with removal, wiping, washing, airing, and absorbing. Baking soda helped with that last step, and because it was so inexpensive, it became a quiet hero in the background of the home. Do you remember seeing a box of baking soda in your mother's or grandmother's refrigerator? A lot of people grew up with one there and never even stopped to ask why. It was simply part of the house, almost like salt on the table or soap near the sink. That is often how the most useful habits disappear. They become so ordinary that nobody explains them, and then one generation later, they are gone. Of course, that does not mean homes in the 1950s were magically cleaner or that women had an easy job. Far from it. Housework was constant, and for many women the pressure to keep a home presentable was heavy. Freshness took effort. A cheap box alone did not do the work. But it helped support a system that made odors easier to manage without turning the home into a cloud of artificial fragrance. That old system also reminds us of something modern life often forgets. Freshness is not always something you add. Very often, it is something you protect. You protect it by keeping yesterday's smells from settling in too deeply. You protect it by noticing the first hint of sourness, dampness, or staleness. You protect it with plain tools used often, not fancy products used late. In other words, the house did not stay fresh because it smelled like flowers from a spray can. It stayed fresh because women were taught to think ahead. The small box of baking soda mattered because it fit that mindset perfectly. It was inexpensive enough for everyday use, humble enough to live in the background, and effective enough to become part of the routine in kitchens all across America. And nowhere did that matter more than inside the refrigerator, where one forgotten smell could tell you almost everything about how well the whole kitchen was being kept. If there was one place in a 1950s home where freshness could be won or lost fast, it was the kitchen. Not the front room, not the hallway, the kitchen. That was where meals were cooked, leftovers were kept, trash gathered, dishcloths stayed damp, and yesterday's smells could quietly turn into today's problem. And in smaller homes, kitchen odors did not stay politely in the kitchen. They drifted. They settled into curtains, moved toward the dining room, and sometimes reached the front door before anyone even noticed what had happened. That is why the refrigerator became one of the most familiar places for a box of baking soda. It was a simple trick, but it worked with the logic of the whole era. Refrigerators were smaller then, which meant less room for old containers to hide. Families also tended to buy food differently. Many homes did not keep the huge overflow of sauces, half-used tubs, takeout boxes, and forgotten leftovers that modern refrigerators often collect. But that did not mean old fridges stayed sweet on their own. Milk, onions, drippings, cooked vegetables, meat, and leftovers all had their own smell. And when those smells mixed in a cramped, cold space, the result could turn sharp in a hurry. A plain open box of baking soda helped take the edge off those odors before they built into something stronger. It did not make the refrigerator smell pretty. That was never really the point. It made the refrigerator smell less troubled, less sour, less mixed, less like several meals trying to live on top of each other. That mattered because the smell inside a refrigerator often told the truth about the state of the kitchen, better than the counters did. A kitchen could look tidy and still carry that stale, cold food smell the second the door opened. Do you remember that box sitting in the back of the fridge, usually near the milk or tucked behind a jar? A lot of children saw it for years without knowing it was doing anything at all. But the box itself was only part of the system. It worked because it sat inside a routine that kept food from turning into a science project. Leftovers were more often wrapped, covered, or used up quickly. Women kept closer track of what was in the icebox or refrigerator because there was less space to waste and less money to throw away. A dish of beans, a bowl of potato salad, a plate of sliced tomatoes, bacon fat saved in a jar, half an onion wrapped in paper, yesterday's roast waiting for sandwiches the next day, all of it had to be managed. Freshness was tied to order. Once food storage got sloppy, smells followed. The pantry worked the same way. Dry goods were expected to stay dry. Bread boxes, flour bins, sugar containers, and cracker tins had to be kept clean, because stale crumbs and trapped moisture could change the smell of the whole cabinet. Even when baking soda was not being used directly on every shelf, it belonged to the same household mindset. Keep things dry. Keep things wiped. Keep food sealed. Do not let small neglect collect until the cupboard smells old. And then there was the sink, which may have been the real center of the whole struggle. A kitchen sink in daily use could turn against the room fast. Damp scraps clinging to the drain, grease left too long, a sponge or rag beginning to sour. Cloudy dishwater, a garbage pail sitting too close nearby, all of it created the kind of smell that no spray ever really fixes. A woman who knew how to keep a kitchen fresh often knew that the sink had to be reset before the rest of the room could feel right. That is another reason baking soda became such a trusted tool. Sprinkled into the sink, worked around the basin, or used near the drain, it helped freshen the area without much cost. Again, not by adding perfume, but by helping deal with the odor itself. Under the cabinet, near the soap, or beside the washcloths, that box was always close because the sink was always one of the first places where the kitchen started to slip. The dishcloth mattered too. This sounds like a small detail, but small details were exactly where freshness was either protected or lost. A dishcloth that had been used all day could pick up grease, milk, rinse water, and food traces. In warm weather, it did not take long for that cloth to smell sour. Some women rinsed them constantly, changed them often, or kept them hanging properly so they could dry between uses. Others reached for baking soda as part of washing or soaking routines that helped pull out the smell before it settled in for good. The important thing was that they did not ignore the warning signs. Once a cloth turned, the whole sink area followed. The garbage pail was another test. In many homes, it was emptied quickly because there was no illusion that a lid alone solved the problem. Onion skins, coffee grounds, eggshells, meat wrappers, vegetable peelings. All of it could heat up and turn in a kitchen long before the room looked dirty. A bit of baking soda in or around the pail could help. But only if the larger rule was still being followed. Remove the source early. That was the lesson behind nearly every old freshness habit. Do not wait for the smell to announce itself to the whole house. Modern kitchens often break that rule without meaning to. Refrigerators are bigger, so forgotten food can hide longer. Trash cans are larger, so smells are given more time to grow. Cleaning products are more scented, so it becomes easy to mistake perfume for cleanliness. A room can smell like lemon and still have a sour sponge, a sticky drain, and leftovers that should have been thrown out 3 days ago. That is not really freshness. It is delay. The 1950s method was plainer, but in some ways more honest. If the kitchen smelled off, something in the rhythm had been missed. The answer was not to cover it. The answer was to correct it. Wipe the shelf, empty the pail, rinse the cloth, open the window, clear the drain. Replace the box, use what is in the refrigerator before it turns. Be sure to keep the pantry dry. Those little actions did more to protect the smell of the home than a whole cabinet full of fragrance ever could. And once food smells were under control, another challenge remained. Hard surfaces could be cleaned fairly quickly. Fabric was different. Towels, aprons, curtains, rugs, and laundry held onto the story of the kitchen much longer. And that is where the quiet fight against staleness moved next. Hard surfaces can be wiped in a few minutes. A counter can be cleared. A sink can be scrubbed. A refrigerator shelf can be cleaned and set right again. Fabric is different. Fabric remembers. It holds cooking smells, dampness, smoke, body odor, soap residue, dust, and all the stale air that hangs around when a house is closed up too long. That is why a 1950s woman who cared about keeping her home fresh did not stop at the kitchen. She had to think about the towels, the aprons, the curtains, the rugs, the bathroom cloths, the bedding, and the laundry basket too. That same cheap box of baking soda followed her there because odor had a way of settling into soft things and staying put. Laundry was one of the first places where this showed up. Clothing and household linens were not only dirty from visible use. They also carried smell. Dish towels picked up grease and food. Washcloths stayed damp. Aprons held onto onion, bacon, flour, and stovetop heat. Bed linens absorbed night air, body oils, and that slightly closed smell that develops in a room without enough circulation. A lot of women understood this without talking about it in fancy terms. They knew that if cloth did not come truly clean, the whole house felt less fresh, even when everything looked tidy. That is where baking soda earned another place in the home. It could be worked into wash routines to help with odors that ordinary soap sometimes left behind. It helped with sourness in towels, musty smells in stored fabric, and the stale feeling that could cling to work clothes or aprons after a long week. Again, the point was not fragrance. The point was to take out what did not belong there. A shirt or kitchen towel did not need to smell floral. It needed to smell clean. That old idea sounds small, but it is one of the biggest differences between then and now. Today, many laundry products are sold through scent. Detergent, beads, softener, dryer sheets, sprays, all pushing the idea that fresh means strong fragrance. But strong fragrance can sit on top of damp fabric just as easily as it can sit on clean fabric. A 1950s homemaker often judged laundry more plainly. Does it smell sour? Does it still hold kitchen grease? Does the towel smell right when it gets wet again? If the answer was no, the job was not finished. Do you remember homes where clean laundry had only a light soap smell or almost no smell at all, and still felt fresher than many homes do now? Rugs and carpets brought a different problem. They trapped the everyday life of the house. Dust from shoes, crumbs from meals, ash from cigarettes, pet smells, damp weather, and ordinary foot traffic all settled downward. In many homes, there was no temptation to buy a special product for every room and every surface. Women used what they had. Baking soda could be scattered lightly over rugs before sweeping or vacuuming to help pull out some of that stale lived-in odor. It was simple, inexpensive, and easy to repeat. That mattered because freshness in an older home depended less on one dramatic deep clean and more on steady small attention. Curtains were another hidden source of smell. Kitchen curtains near a stove could take on grease and food. Bathroom curtains or window fabric could pick up dampness. Bedroom curtains held dust and shut in air. And because curtains hung quietly in the background, people often forgot how much smell they carried. A housewife usually did not need a scientific explanation to understand this. She only needed to take them down, wash them, and notice how different the room felt after they were rehung. Freshness often returned through fabric before it returned through fragrance. The bathroom had its own challenges. Small bathrooms were common, and in a tight room, damp towels, soap scum, old drains, and poor airflow could turn the air stale very quickly. A room did not need to look dirty to smell tired. That is an important difference. Many old homemakers paid close attention to signs modern life often covers up. A towel that was used too many times. A bath mat that never fully dried. A toilet area that looked fine but needed a better scrub. A sink drain beginning to give off that faint, unpleasant smell. Baking soda had a place there too, in cleaning routines and odor control, but again, it worked best inside a larger habit of early care. That same quiet battle showed up in the less glamorous corners of family life. Diaper pails, hamper bottoms, ashtrays, pet bedding, mudroom rugs, shoe areas, coat closets, men's work clothes, school clothes that came home carrying dust and sweat. None of these things were new to the 1950s. Homes then had plenty of chances to smell bad. The difference was that a lot of women were taught to treat odor as something that spread in layers. A diaper pail could affect the laundry area. The laundry area could affect the bathroom. A damp bathroom could affect the bedroom hallway. What felt like one smell was often several small neglected things joining together. Airing out a room was not old-fashioned theater. It was practical. A home needed fresh air moving through it, especially when daily life involved cooking, washing, smoking, and bodies living close together in smaller spaces. Baking soda could absorb some odor, but it was never meant to replace air, sunlight, washing, or scrubbing. That is another useful lesson. The old routines worked because each part supported the others. Fabric was washed, rugs were shaken or swept, towels were changed, windows were opened. Problem spots were noticed early. The cheap mineral helped, but the rhythm carried the house. That does not mean women in the 1950s had some magical formula modern people lost. Because they were wiser or more disciplined by nature, their homes could smell stale too. Their work was hard, repetitive, and often taken for granted. But many of them were trained by mothers, aunts, or neighbors to keep small problems from becoming large ones. That habit of early correction is what modern homes often lack. We tolerate more hidden smell because products promise to cover it for us. Do you remember a home that smelled clean without smelling perfumed? That kind of freshness was not an accident. It came from women noticing the dish towel before it turned, the rug before it held too much dust, the bathroom before dampness took over, and the laundry before a stale smell settled in too deeply. And behind many of those quiet routines sat the same humble box, waiting under the sink or near the wash things, ready to help with the next small problem. Before it became the smell of the whole house, The little box did not disappear because it stopped working. It faded because the whole idea around freshness changed. In the 1950s, a fresh home usually meant odors had been prevented, reduced, aired out, washed away, or absorbed before they settled too deeply into the rooms. In later decades, freshness started to mean something else. It became a scent. It became a product category. It became something you could buy in a brighter package, plug into the wall, spray into the air, drop into the laundry, or warm with a flame on the coffee table. That shift changed more than shopping habits. It changed how people thought about the problem itself. A bad smell used to be treated as a signal. Something in the rhythm of the house needed attention. The refrigerator had to be cleared. The dishcloth had to be changed. The rug needed care. The trash had to go out. The bathroom needed air and scrubbing. Baking soda fit into that older way of thinking because it helped remove the problem without pretending the problem was not there. It did not distract the nose. It supported the routine. Commercial air fresheners offered something different. They promised speed, ease, and a more modern kind of comfort. That is easy to understand. Life changed. More women worked outside the home. Families were busier. Houses grew larger, and families moved to the suburbs. Shopping changed. Packaging changed. Refrigerators got bigger. Laundry products multiplied. The market began to sell convenience not only as saved labor, but as a feeling. Press a button, spray a room, plug in a scent, and the home seemed handled. For many people, that felt like progress, and in some ways, it was. Nobody should pretend the old system came without cost. Housewives in the 1950s were often carrying enormous pressure. The home reflected on them, and the standards could be exhausting. A clean-smelling kitchen or a guest-ready bathroom did not appear out of thin air. They came from work that was constant, repetitive, and too often invisible. It would not be honest to talk about old household wisdom without admitting that. Freshness in that era was tied not only to skill, but also to expectation. Still, the useful lesson did not disappear just because the pressure around it was real. That is why this small habit is worth looking at again. The value was never in pretending that women should go backward. The value is in noticing that some very ordinary methods solved problems at the source, and we often replaced them with products that cover the result instead. Think about how many modern items are sold around smell alone. Air sprays, scent boosters, plug-ins, odor-eliminating gels, cartridges, candles, diffusers, room mists, fabric refreshers, toilet drops, closet scents, drawer sachets. There is a product for every corner of the house, and many people still feel as if their homes are fighting a losing battle against stale air. That should tell us something. Buying more fragrance is not always the same as solving odor. The old habit points to a simpler chain of logic. Remove what is causing the smell. Absorb what lingers. Wash what is holding it. Dry what has stayed damp. Let clean air move through the room. Repeat before the problem grows. That is what the little box represented. Not magic. Not nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. When you look at it that way, baking soda almost becomes a symbol for a larger forgotten skill. It reminds us that many 1950s women were not using hacks the way people talk about them now. They were living inside systems. The refrigerator stayed fresher because food was tracked more closely. The sink stayed fresher because cloths were changed and drains were noticed. The bathroom stayed fresher because dampness was not ignored. The laundry stayed fresher because stale smells were treated as unfinished work, not hidden under perfume. A cheap mineral helped with all of that because it belonged to the same philosophy: solve small problems while they are still small. When did freshness become something we bought instead of something we maintained? That is a real question because the answer is about more than air fresheners. It is about the way modern life teaches people to respond later and purchase more. A home can now be filled with beautiful scent names and still feel tired underneath. Meanwhile, an older home with open windows, washed fabric, a clean sink, and one plain box under the cabinet can feel lighter without announcing itself at all. That is probably why so many people still remember their mother's or grandmother's house as smelling clean in a way that is hard to describe. Not strongly floral, not artificially sweet, not like mountain breeze or fresh cotton, just clean, quietly clean. The kitchen did not fight the living room. The bathroom did not carry a damp smell. The towels did not turn sour. The refrigerator did not release a warning every time the door opened. The air felt looked after. Of course, nobody needs to recreate an entire 1950s house to borrow that lesson. The useful part is much smaller and much more realistic. Put a box in the refrigerator. Keep one under the sink. Use it where fabric, drains, bins, rugs, or damp spots start drifting stale. But more importantly, bring back the thinking behind it. Treat odor as information. Let it tell you where the rhythm slipped, then correct that small place before the whole room starts carrying it. That is what so many old household skills were really doing. They were not glamorous. They were not expensive. They did not announce themselves. They worked quietly in the background and made the house feel better than the cost of the item ever suggested. A $2 box could help because the woman using it understood where freshness was won or lost each day. And maybe that is why this tiny forgotten habit still feels so powerful. It reminds us that a cared-for home does not always come from more products, more scent, or more money. Sometimes it comes from one ordinary object, one repeated habit, and one person paying attention before the air in the room starts asking for help. If old household wisdom still matters to you, subscribe before you go. There are many more quiet skills like this worth bringing back, one simple habit at a time. Somewhere in America, for years, a small box sat beside the milk, under the sink, or near the wash things, doing its job without perfume, electricity, or praise. It never needed to take over the room. It only needed to help keep the room from going stale in the first place.